channel, I present various ideas and designs of technologies. This presentation focuses on the technology of high productivity Algae Raceway channel ponds. Throughout the presentation, the pronunciation adopted is algae, in conformity with the forgotten language of Latin, akin to formulae being the plural of formula, the singular. To boot then, algae are the commonly known green scums in ponds such as are here in the picture you are viewing, and which often appear spontaneously in blooms under certain conditions in the environment. Yet these pond scums promise a future of environmental cleanup, circular economy allowing for waste-free use of raw materials, nutraceuticals, which are special materials for nourishing the human body such as omega-3, and biopharmaceuticals, which are actually natural medications for various ailments, and even biofuels that could one day replace gasoline as we know it, and through the circular reuse of raw materials, stem the issue of global warming. Most efforts, however, have been expended with the respect to the use as raw materials for biofuel production, and it is also this sector that has suffered the most huge losses. Several approaches have been adopted for the commercial large-scale production of algae for use in industrial operations. Being green stuff and existing by utilizing carbon dioxide and sunlight, just as plants by the process known as photosynthesis, the approaches to commercial large-scale production of algae have generally sort of been adaptations of the methods of farming by letting the sunlight fall directly on the suspension of these algae while simultaneously getting carbon dioxide to come in contact with the suspensions. One approach has been by circulating the algae suspension in transparent colorless glass, as in this picture. The horizontal orientation of the glass tube is a matter of designer preference and as such has matters little in the use as shown by this contrasting vertical orientation. Some designers even use coiled glass tubes with vertical orientations, while others use coiled glass tubes with horizontal orientations, and some even have the coiled glass tube being aligned at an angle. Some have even used transparent plastic bags to contain the suspension and then hanging the bags on strings in the sunlight. The most prevalent design, however, were the channels and ponds and various versions thereof. By far, the most common industrial attempt at algae farming is meant by this familiar channel pond, as in the picture, that was so ubiquitous in the 2000s through 2010s. So the most common commercial large-scale production attempts, in effect, was using shallow channels as these. The general channel is a shallow channel either dug into the ground or built up with walls above ground. The suspension of the algae is then circulated in the channel using a sort of paddle wheel of the sort used in the old to drive seafarers. All the various designs for production operations for biofuel, however, were soon determined on evaluation as not financially viable, as one venture company after another failed, and invariably almost all went out of business producing biofuel. Of course, that scope of failure should be expected. The operations of the algae cultivation have numerous productivity issues. None of the many production methods constructed the production of gasoline from crude oil with the production of biofuels from algae. Remarkably, there is this critical time compression in the biofuel production operations relative to the crude oil gasoline production that has been overlooked. Crude oil formed from plants that took very long times to grow and then died and then got gradually converted into the crude oil. Biofuel production, therefore, required that the conditions of several years under which crude oil formed be shot into days on a small scale or be on large expanse of land farming in order to meet the volume demand. In effect, the algae processes attempts to compress the time span of many years of production of fossil fuel into many hours of algae growth, which clearly causes time compression issues, which needs to be clearly identified and addressed to obtain the higher productivity. The specific performance issues are as listed on the picture you are currently viewing. The matter of time compression is of two considerations: total absorbed carbon dioxide time compression and total solar energy irradiation time compression. These then are the two mission critical demands that must be focused on and addressed. Now let's take up the performance issues one at a time. First, the total absorbed carbon dioxide time compression. Clearly, if there is a need to compress the time to convert large quantities of carbon dioxide into starch and oil in the algae cell, then cultivating the algae at the same or current atmospheric concentration will cause performance issues. Next, the total irradiated solar energy time compression. Similarly, if there is the clear need to compress the time to convert large quantities of solar energy radiation to energize the conversion of carbon dioxide into starch and oil in the algae cells, then cultivating the algae at the conditions of time compression with the same insolation will also cause performance issues. So both of those will be changed. Now we come to the design issue 1, biologics contamination. First, among the design issues is the problem of contamination. Because the channel is open to the atmosphere, bacteria in the atmosphere, dust, and what have you may always fall into the algae suspension channel that leave off of the algae and effectively reduce the production output or cause conditions that are unfavorable for rapid growth of the algae. The next design issue, issue 2, is that the suspension has variable concentration, meaning there is continuous evaporation of water of the suspension. So the concentration of the fertilizers, of the nutrients, are not the same. They're constantly varying. When water is added, it changes. When water evaporates, it changes. And therefore, the growth of the algae is not at a defined pace. It changes, fluctuates up and down depending on the prevailing conditions. And of course, figuring out what each algae needs in terms of the right amount of water is very tedious, given that each algae has a different morphology and hence different characteristics. And that brings us to design issue 3, non-constant insolation. Notwithstanding that the sunlight is not enough for rapid growth as required by time compression, the sunlight itself varies throughout the day due to several reasons. It could be cloud, rain, or other natural causes, including hurricane or typhoons, And currently, there is implemented no means of ensuring the uniformity of the irradiation across the channel and or throughout the day. So there's both spatial variations and time variations of the insolation, which is not constant. And that brings us design issue 4, non-constant state of mixedness. Uniform state of mixedness is generally required, but because the wind is blowing and the channel is open, any sort of wind blowing over the landmass and therefore over the channel will cause the roiling of the surface or some ripples on the surface of the channel, effectively changing the mixing dynamics of the suspension and hence the predictability of production. And there is no means of assuring constant mixedness at the moment. Which brings us now to design issue 5, the uncontrolled reaction time. The combination of the above factors, the difficulty of ensuring stability of the concentration, the uniformity of the sunlight, and then the state of mixedness, they all contribute to variable reaction time, meaning the reactions are occurring under various conditions, not a uniform condition that allows for predictability. And in addition to that, we also have the harvesting time. Because the fluid or the suspension is always in motion within the channel, harvesting from the channel is not a constant process. In some days it can take 30 minutes, in other days it can take 10 minutes, and as a result the production volume is not predictable, and that needs to be controlled. Reaction time needs to be controlled precisely so that predictability of production volume can be assured. And then we come to the deployment issue. the deployment of the channel on the ground in itself presents an issue, because it means that to increase production, we have to maintain multiples of the channel, and that of course uses up a lot of space of the land. And there's a land constraint because humanity also needs land for habitat. Besides that, deploying it on the ground level leads to deployment issue number 2, which is that if one were to deploy it in an area where there is flood and or hurricane or there is typhoon, then the channel is bound to be disrupted from time to time as these natural events come about. For instance, if there's flooding due to subsidence, then the channels will be flooded over. If there is a hurricane or typhoon, then it's destroyed. And so there is this issue of environmental impact that needs to be addressed. Finally, we come to the raw material issue, which is the need of life competitive use. By the need of life, in this particular case, I mean phosphorus. Some people also object to the need for phosphorus in the algae post-extraction waste as a potential impact on food production. They assume that the phosphorus in the algae, after the oil, the lipid, and the starch have been extracted, are wasted. And therefore, humanity needs phosphorus to survive, and wasting it through algae is just not acceptable to some people. So they feel that the use of algae for production purposes competes with life. Now, obviously, the resolution of these 10 issues, as delineated, would result in the adoption of a high productivity algae raceway channel pond for commercial large-scale production of algae, and perhaps even result in profitable operation and hence financially viable venture company. But first, these issues have to be addressed. Digressing for a moment, however, if you have not as yet subscribed to the channel, do please click the subscribe button. Thank you. You will then enjoy the privilege of being informed of the next presentation the moment one is published. Now, back to the presentation. Admittedly, of course, all of the performance issues can be remedied with design augmentations, each of which is delineated presently and also in the image in display. The augmentations being offered have, of course, been based on standard designs and can be readily retrofitted. This presentation, in effect, addresses first and foremost the 2-time compression factors with respect to the Algae Raceway channel ponds, with the object of uplifting the design to high productivity state of operation, such as may even be suitable for biofuel production. In effect, the numerous low productivity issues related to the raceway channel algae farming shortcomings must all be addressed relative and secondarily to these 2-time compression factors as defined by the time compression requirements. The first solution of the first-time compression is that the limitation due to the atmospheric carbon dioxide low concentration will have to be changed with a higher level of concentration. By the requirement of the time compression, then, any approach must use much higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the gas brought into contact with the suspension than the concentration in the atmospheric air. Rationally, this approach will induce rapid production of algae and hence accelerate growth of oil and starch within the cells. Clearly, the need for higher than atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide for commercial large-scale production of algae requires a negative emission technology to be co-deployed with the Algae Raceway channel ponds in supplemental role of producing large quantities of carbon dioxide by extraction from the atmosphere for utilization by the algae. While not trivial to implement, there are currently designs out there that addresses the need for higher than normal concentration of carbon dioxide gas supply. The second-time compression solution, of course, by corollary, is that large quantity of sunlight must also be shown on the suspension to enable rapid utilization of the carbon dioxide. The need for higher than normal intensity of sunlight requires that in addition to the sunlight shining naturally on the channel pond, additional means of irradiating the pond with sunlight must be effected. Solar collectors will have to be deployed to collect more sunlight outside of the land space of the channel and be irradiated on the channel using a retrofit radiation device. The issue of contamination, which deals with design issues, is itself solved with the use of a transparent trough of superficial dimensions matching those of the raceway channel. The trough is deployed as cover over the channel and preferably is made of glass to minimize the changes to the light transmission characteristics. Of course, the trough also provides a structure to which can be affixed the irradiator device inside the interior of the inverted trough, enabling the irradiation of the light of the second time compression solution, the solar collector. Design 2, suspension variable concentration. That issue, needless to observe, is automatically solved to some extent by the use of the trough for preventing contamination, since the problem of evaporation is automatically solved. In any case, it's solved in the sense that the vapor contained inside the trough, and so a derivative issue obtains. The evaporation of the water at this stage becomes more problem in the sense that the vapor may partially condense somewhat and fog up the trough, thereby reducing the light availability. However, this is readily resolved by the use of a cooler condenser that differentially condenses the vapor and returns the resulting liquid to the pond, and with the gas recycled to the process, provisioning the extra carbon dioxide. That brings us to design issue 3, the non-constant irradiation of sunlight. The lack of control of constant light intensity is addressed in this case by retrofitting the irradiator device with a controller, which has a sensor that monitors the differential between the design specification time compression light intensity and the prevailing intensity, and causes the irradiator to provide additional sources in proportion. There is, of course, the lack of control of uniformity of quantity of light that radiates on the suspension, and such must be ensured for the solution applied for the time compression issue to be resolved fully. And that brings us to design issue 4. Notably, the design improvement of use of trough for preventing contamination also simultaneously solves the issue of non-uniformity and non-constancy of the state of mixedness, because now the channel is shielded from the ambient windiness by the trough. And on to design issue 5, controlled regular reaction time. The solution of the above 4 design issues, of course, form a core intrinsic solution to the reaction time specificity. Those only need to be accompanied, of course, with a shortening of the time span of harvesting at harvesting schedules. The start and end times of the harvesting process must be severely constrained and made constant. And then we come up to the expanse of land. The demand of large expanse of land is readily resolved with the deployment of the channel in structures that adopt urban farming approach. The use of such structures, of course, allows the stacking of the channel at different layers above each other upwards, which entails vertical multiples instead of horizontal multiples, and effectively sparing land. Of course, that does not take away from the fact that the negative emission system now has to be centralized, and the solar collector system may also have to be centralized at the base, at the ground level, and then distributed to the different levels. The other case of the deployment of issue 2, which is environmental disruptions to avoid flooding, can be resolved easily by keeping the first level of the urban farming structure about 30 feet above the ground. In that particular case, then, natural flooding would not contaminate the channel. Hurricanes and typhoons will also not contaminate the channel. Of course, needless to say, the structures must be built to resist earthquakes, hurricanes, and typhoons. For the purposes of making useful the recommended augmentation technologies, a worthwhile thrust is the discussions of the technology vendors. Indeed, vendors of the augmentation technologies that assure the high productivity performance are not very specific except for one or two. Negative emission technology is performed by several German companies and can be readily acquired from there. There are also European companies that have such technologies. Solar technology, for the purposes of light transmission, is available through our sister relationship, Enhanced Knowledge LLC. It's on the internet, it could be found, Enhanced Knowledge LLC. Cooler condensers are off-the-shelf process equipment and could be purchased from any process equipment seller or reseller. Troughs, for glass troughs, can be built by many conduit builders. Structure builders are plentiful in Japan and other parts of the world, and they can easily be purchased. I thank you for taking the time to come to this premiere presentation and look forward to continue to give you much improved informative presentations in the coming future.